This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Welcome, Talk Catholic, the website.com, your host, Tim Kilcoyne. No agendas here, just the straight and narrow, through Mary to Jesus, the Catholic faith proclaimed and preserved. Hope to see you here every week. Talk Catholic with Tim Kilcoyne. Oh my goodness, time of this recording. I hope I have turned a corner physically. Oh, would you pray with me? I've had a very troubling leg injury going back to Christmas, December 20th to be exact. Piriformis syndrome is likely what it was, or sciatica. It's one or the other. But it was painful. It was very painful, and it took 5 months. 5 months. I just hit a bucket of balls today. As the PGA golf professional I still am. And that's long in the running. I didn't know if I'd be able to hit any balls anymore. When you have an injury of that degree of seriousness, you're never sure, and whatever be God's will. And I certainly did the best I could to offer up my pain, because there was lots of it and plenty of solitude to go with it. And I feel like spring has sprung, even though it's summer, finally, for Tim. And I just can't be, and I want you to know, always try to find a saint who may have had the trouble that you're experiencing. In my case, I went to St. Francis Xavier, whose incorrupt body is missing part of a leg. And also St. Ignatius had a cannonball hit his leg. And Mother Mary Angelica, needless to say, had real problems with her legs before a wonderful miracle. So in addition to St. Dymphna, who I always go to for anything related to the nerves, or the mind, for that matter. So these are the four greats, always to Our Lady of Lourdes and St. Joseph, to the precious blood of Jesus. It's, you got to believe. You got to believe. And I was doing cartwheels today. Well, not quite cartwheels, but I don't think I could ever do those. But what a joy, what a peace, what a consolation. In the midst of the trials and tribulations that have been going on in our church. Oh my goodness. I don't even want to go there. What comes out of the Vatican on a weekly basis, I can't even deal with it anymore. It's outrageous. There is an attempt. There's a wonderful professor, William Thomas, who's an insider. He's a longtime professor of theology over there at the St. John Paul II Institute before the whole faculty was virtually ousted by Pope Francis. And he's just written a book on Catholic revivalist movement versus the synodal church. And the two are not the same. And I've been sending up lots of red flares about this synodal business in trying to democratize the church and let anybody vote on church teaching. Oh, how lovely. Luther would be overjoyed. So it's Protestantism 2.0 or 3.0, I don't know which. But whenever the individual is allowed to reign supreme, it's not good for the common good. So just remember also something that I said, beware of any kind of third edition of our catechism upcoming. After a recent consistory not too long ago, Pope Leo was talking about the need for a new catechism of Vatican II. I can only imagine what that might consist of if it starts changing church doctrine. So hold on to your catechism, second edition. Believe me, you'll be glad that you did. And let's pray for Holy Mother Church that she not be split for a third time in church history. We've had two schisms, and we're headed towards a third if things don't reverse. If the wheels don't reverse on the part of the hierarchy over in the Vatican, we got a big-time crisis right around the corner. Anyway, today I'd like to continue on with our little morality and media segment, operating out of one of the great popes of all time, Pope Pius XII, in his encyclical letter on motion pictures, radio, and television. And I'm going to that for some of the principles that Holy Mother Church has put forth relative to these arts. And these were, 60 years ago, motion pictures hit the screen. But now we've got AI and the internet and all the rest of it. So we've got new technologies that have to be addressed. And some of the books I'm going to take little excerpts from: A Mind at Peace, Reclaiming an Ordered Soul in the Age of Distraction, Christopher Blum and Joshua Hochschild, in addition to William Donahue, Christianity in the Crosshairs. And we'll hear a little bit from Truth at Last by Father James Altman. And in all three of these books, they reference the influence of the media upon the populace. And it's, remember, I'm going back to an old book, You Can Change the World, by Father Jim Kelleher of the Christopher Movement. And that's a 1945 copyright, which usually means it's pretty darn solid and good, contrary to the modernist frame of mind in the church. And in that book, he references what the Naked Communist book references, the means by which there is a dictatorial takeover of society. They go after the power centers, which are medicine, academia, the church, Hollywood, government, the arts. These are the venues that influence the most the mind. And so this is where the devil goes. And it's no different today than it was in 1945. Truth is truth. In fact, Father Altman's book is called Truth at Last. There's a truth teller, if there ever was one. In any event, we will celebrate Father's Day with an ending prayer from Mornings with Jesus, and we'll also dive into Kennedy Hall's book, Terror of Demons, for a little bit more on reclaiming Catholic masculinity for all those fathers in the second half. I'd like to reiterate some basic principles that the Pope put forth in this wonderful encyclical. In the service of truth and virtue is the subtopic. And he says, to be at the service of the truth demands not only that all refrain from error, from lies, from deceit of all kinds, but also that they shun everything that can encourage a manner of living and acting which is false, imperfect, or harmful to another party. But above all, let the truths handed down by God's revelation be held sacred and inviolable. Rather, why should not these noble arts, these new technologies he's referring to at that time, which he, I'm sure, would refer to the internet and AI at this time, why should not these noble arts strive particularly to this end, that they spread the teaching of God and His Son, Jesus Christ, and instill into the minds that Christian truth, which alone can provide the strength from above to the mass of men, aided by which they may be able, with calmness and courage, to overcome the crises and endure the severe trials of the age in which they now live. Moreover, these new arts should not only serve the truth, but also the perfecting of human life and morals. Let them make an active contribution to this in the three ways we are now going to write about, namely, in the news published, in the instruction imparted, and in the shows presented. And so now we're moving in this direction of the news, the nightly news, the fake news. News of any event, he says, even if nothing but the bare fact is related, has yet an aspect of its own which concerns morality in some way. This aspect, affecting human morals, must never be neglected, for the news of any kind provokes a mental judgment and influences the will. The newsreader who worthily fulfills his task should crush no one by his words, but rather try to understand and explain as best he can the disasters reported and the crimes committed. To explain is not necessarily to excuse. It is to suggest the beginning of a remedy and consequently to perform a task at once positive and constructive. So, in other words, no propaganda. That's not what the news is. And I'd like to quickly turn to Bill Donahoe's book, Christianity at the Crosshairs, from his chapter 3 on thought control. Bill says, tradition means something special to all peoples, and for most Americans it is intimately tied to our patriotic history. But there are some members of the ruling class coached and coaxed by radicals who see tradition as anathema, as something worthy of being discarded. They are more interested in erasing the past than in preserving it. That way they can take command and institute their agenda. Attempts to delegitimize our history inevitably pits elites and radicals against Christianity, the font of our traditions. And he's referring to Alex Huxley of Brave New World and George Orwell of the book 1984. He says both Huxley and Orwell saw erasing the past as a priority for ruling elites. It remains so today in many elite quarters. In Huxley's Brave New World, set in London 600 years in the future, is a society without war, hunger, disease, but there are other elements that make it a disaster. The past would be scrubbed free, with no recollections of history, art, and literature. Most important, religion would be eliminated, thus setting the table for the power brokers to secure the total allegiance of its subjects. The average Joe would be stripped of his primal fidelity to God, making him susceptible to the overtures of the ruling class. What follows should ring a bell. The parallels with our country today are striking. The controller in Huxley's story declares, "History is bunk," explaining that's why you're taught no history. When he is asked by a dissenter why some books such as those written by Shakespeare are prohibited, he is told, "Because it's old." That's the chief reason. We haven't any use for old things here. Similarly, museums have been closed and historical monuments blown up. Orwell depicted a similar reality. If someone was caught with a diary that represents the past, he could be punished by death. The ruling class, known as the party, wiped out the past. Every record has been destroyed or falsified. Every book has been rewritten. This is a quote from 1984. Every picture has been repainted. Every statue and street and building has been renamed. Every date has been altered. Why? The party slogan is, "Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past." And then Bill explains that the goal here is to numb the masses, make them dumb, kind of like with fentanyl, but also with technologies, with these things like the smorgasbord of various social media vehicles that people use for their communication today. He says, "It is astonishing how many Americans are in constant need of being entertained. When I was a young man, most of the passengers on the Long Island Railroad were reading a book or a newspaper. Now few do. They are on their phones, talking to whomever, playing video games, watching a TV show or movie, doing puzzles, shopping, listening to music, gambling online, but few are reading. Worse, when many people meet their friends in bars, restaurants, and clubs, after a quick hello, they go right back to their phones. As soon as they actually get together, they can't wait to converse with someone who is not with them. And as soon as they get together with that person, they contact someone else. Even more maddening is the sight of family members sitting in a restaurant, not talking to each other. The kids have their videos, and the adults are texting away." Oh, this is classic stuff, ladies and gentlemen. This is exactly how mediocrity is the only fruit, so-called, of the party line of a dictatorship. Bring the standards down. And this all goes back to Pope Pius XII's warning that you just need to tell the news and what is true, and not start giving your version of it. Your truth is a modern term, believe me. This is why education is a disaster area these days, and it's all purposeful. They don't want critical thinking. They don't want tests based on merit. They want you numb and therefore dumb to accept the party line. And this is why the news broadcasts are no longer pretty much news broadcasts. They're not telling, except for maybe the very show, Just the News, they're not telling just the news. They're giving their slant on what happened, their opinion on what happened. And most of the time, they're not giving us accuracy as to exactly what happened. And that's not the news of yesterday, and certainly not my childhood growing up with Walter Cronkite and Arch McDonald and some of these guys, David Brinkley, Chet Huntley, John Chancellor. They told the news. And you didn't know whether they were Democrat or Republican or anything. You didn't know because they just told the news. Now it's just a big propaganda machine. You got to know which political party slant, which one you're listening to. Listen to this from the book, A Mind at Peace, Reclaiming an Ordered Soul in an Age of Distraction. A tool is something that requires skill and virtue to use well. Often, however, our technologies are not merely tools that strengthen our agency, but are devices that substitute for skill and virtue by allowing us to achieve goals without effort and without a sense of responsibility. This feature of technology has long been observed, but it has been noticed in distinctive ways in the digital age. One of the most striking features of Sherry Turkle's research into the use of smartphones and social media, when asked to reflect, most people, especially young people, are able to recognize the bad habits, the unhealthy dynamics, and the selfishness and narcissism manifested in their use of digital technology. yet continue to act as if they've grown accustomed to it. This is a classic sign of addiction, which is a crippling of agency, a pathological directing of one's freedom into a rut of compulsion. We know that some technology designers of hardware interfaces of games and other apps, even of social media, aim to induce addiction by drawing on cutting-edge neurological and psychological research to hook users on their products. It is widely known that Western countries, despite their degree of comfort and wealth, have unusually high incidences of depression and other psychopathologies manifesting themselves in a sense of dissipation of the will or paralysis of action. From a theological perspective, it is plausible to assert the unnamed evil of our times is the sin of acedia or sloth, which is not mere laziness, but truly a kind of discouragement, a despair, a sense of purposelessness and powerlessness. So what would Pope Pius XII really have us do in today's world? I'm sure he'd tell us to shut off the devices and listen to Father James Altman, as he says in his new book, Truth at Last. We get out of our faith what we put into it. Do the minimum, get the minimum. As a recent interview with Jesse Romero, he said, garbage in, garbage out. I'm speaking especially to fathers here for tomorrow. How can we expect our children to know the Gospels if we haven't read them ourselves? How can we expect our children to pray when they don't see us praying the Holy Rosary or practicing any of the glorious devotions handed down by the Catholic Church over the past 2,000 years? How can we expect our children to attend Mass on Sundays and holy days when we play fast and loose with that rule? Speaking of homilies, did you demand that your priest actually give a homily of substance and not mere platitudes and woke ideology? If this was impossible, did you seek out a parish where such homilies are given? Have you studied your own faith daily for an hour a day, as Jesus asked, so that you know what a homily of substance sounds like? Here's an unpopular question. Will you name your children after a bona fide saint, not a TV star or invented name that sounds cool? Dear family, you are your children's primary educators in the faith. And earlier in the chapter, Father makes clear that the devil is all about rat poison. He's using these technologies and piggybacking on half-truths, making them appear enticing and fun and wholesome, when in fact there's a nugget of big-time evil, kind of like a really funny sitcom that is clearly endorsing anything goes in the area of sex. And we fall for that, and we get lured and dragged into the pit. The devil doesn't come with horns, and that's exactly what Father Altman tells us as well, and what Pope Pius XII told us many years ago. Thus, he is as relevant today as he ever was. This is WQPH Radio 89.3 FM. We come with halos for everyone. On the way back, Terror of Demons with Kennedy Hall. Well, ever appropriate to Father's Day is the concept of chastening and mortifying. And we start with St. Paul from Hebrews chapter 12, verses 6 to 10. He says, "For whom the Lord loveth, he chastiseth, and he scourgeth every son whom he receiveth. Persevere under discipline. God deal with you with his sons. For what son is there whom the Father doth not correct? But if you be without chastisement, whereof all are made partakers, then you are not sons. We have fathers of our flesh for instructors, and we reverence them. Shall we not much more obey the Father of spirits and live?" Kennedy Hall tells us the meaning of this passage is quite clear. God inflicts corrective pain and punishment on those whom he loves. This means we are called to persevere under discipline and look to God as our Father. Our earthly fathers, in a way, act in the place of God when they chastise us. St. Paul ratifies this point. He suggests that without receiving chastisement from our fathers, it is as if we are fatherless. And so he continues in the passage quoted at the beginning here. St. Paul speaks about chastising his body, and he uses the analogy of the athlete who strives for mastery in order to win a race. He reminds us that we show self-control when chasing physical goals. Thus, how much more important to chase eternal goals with even more vigor. Chastising our bodies gives us the credentials of one who practices what he preaches. And since we are seeking life with Christ, we need to continually die with Christ, as this is how we obtain eternal life. In a similar manner to sleep being a preparation for death, so too is mortification a preparation for the passion we must go through. Mortification brings us further from the mastery of the body to the mastery of the soul, in order to spiritually participate in death to self. Dying to self helps us to live out our baptism, in which we die with Christ so that we can rise with Christ. I was just thinking of an interview with Father Chad Ripperger, the great priest exorcist, and he said in many shows that the deliverance of these evil spirits, the demons, Satan himself, has become more difficult in recent times because the church's leaders are not practicing what they preach. And so the sacramental graces are not as powerful as they used to be, when there was a much greater degree of orthodoxy across the board. And these days we got civil wars going on in way too many places within the church, and that's unacceptable. That's just not how it's supposed to be. One holy Catholic apostolic. And so he said that one of the ways by which certain forms of oppression of evil can be lifted is exactly through what Kennedy Hall is talking about, performing little acts of self-denial every day. In fact, Father Ripperger has said in previous shows as well, he speaks quite a bit about the importance of meditation. 15 minutes a day is almost guaranteed to keep evil away. So that's pretty good. These are weapons, ladies and gentlemen. Recently, you've been hearing the interview with Jesse Romero. Check out the Holy League Institute, I believe is the name, .org. He is developing a whole catechetical school on how to ward off evil in the daily mundane events of life, using the weapons that have been provided by Holy Mother Church all through the ages, such as the Rosary and meditation, and all these other little acts of self-denial. And all you again have to do is think of the athlete, and that guy or gal that reaches the top. They've done something extra to get there. They went literally the extra mile and made it hurt all the more to be as good as they are. And it's absolutely no different in the spiritual life. And we need to understand this is not something just for Lent. It's for 365. Think of what you might have given up for Lent, especially in the area of food. Do that throughout the year. And maybe on Wednesdays and Fridays, you continue to fast and not eat meat, for instance. May not be a canon law to do that, but you do it for the Lord. These are the little acts of self-denial, or just not being abrupt with somebody when you easily could be. Trying to understand that prayer of St. Francis, Lord, let me seek not to be understood, but to understand. And keep it basic, helping out with the daily chores, even though they might be somebody else's technically, but you just want to help out a little bit, a helping hand. These are all little acts of self-denial, self-mortification, and they keep the devil away. Kennedy Hall says that we can also train our bodies through hard work, like chopping wood or shoveling snow. If you already have a physical job, there's no need to pile on a weight training schedule. Instead, seek ways to make certain movements physically harder. Then he is very not condemning entirely, but reduce the headphone usage. He said music itself can destroy or build a moral compass. Streaming certain music directly into our head at all hours of the day is another way to train ourselves to crave vices for comfort. He refers to Father Chad Ripperger himself, recognizing Gregorian chant is really the only music acceptable in the course of an exorcism. And he says, you wonder why we should listen to secular music in the first place. I find myself remembering something I think I told my parents. It says, years ago, we're going to be in big trouble when the great entertainment becomes the music of the 70s or the 80s. When the cultural shift in music just became extreme. And all you have to do is look at the early Beatles and the later Beatles, just as an example. People, just like the theologians I was referring to in a previous show about how some of them stay stuck in a time warp theologically, because that was their prime time of education, also back there in the 70s. Well, the same is true with your taste in music, because that was the time when we were free to listen to it, wasn't it? Once you get out there in the big bad world and you're working, slaving away all hours mostly, you don't even have much time to listen to music. And so you kind of gravitate to the time when you most listen to music. And for most of us baby boomers, that's back there in the 70s again, 80s, whatever. Now that's become the great entertainment, but it ain't great. It was immoral to begin with. Much of it. Throw it out. Get rid of it. Condemn it. Don't perpetuate it. Don't play it at restaurants now. At least there was a little creativity to the music back then. There's virtually nothing after the 1990s onward. It just almost, becomes noise, just really bad noise. And so you'll find this nostalgic sentimentality to go back to those 70s and 80s for the music. Well, it might have been better than it is now, but that doesn't make it good. This is how we mortify ourselves. Find the music that's been always good, across all ages, that stands the test of time, like good dads. And I had one great one, John Michael Kilcoyne from Clinton, Mass. I miss you, Pop. This is WQPH Radio 89.3 FM. Happy Father's Day. Good dads rule. Let your light shine. That is what it's all about here at WQPH Radio 89.3 FM. But we need to hear your story. You want your voice to be his voice. That is making the faith known to others. Please, my number is 877-625-3727. Tim Kilcoyne, TalkCatholic.com. St. Mother Teresa told us, your ministry is your work right where you are. Grab on to this microphone. God bless.